the mayor of Herzliya, and now it is a privilege for me to invite Colonel in Reserves Mickey Alter, the Director of External Relations at the IPS, to introduce the Major General Herzi Halevi, the Chief of the IDF Military Intelligence Directorate. Mr. Alter has always exerted such an effort, burning the midnight oil, for everything he has done for the IDC. And the floor is yours, Colonel Mickey Alter. Dear friends and dear colleagues, those who have walked the same paths as we have, welcome. At the moment, here in the mark of the regional chaos, and yet a window of opportunity for Israel. Undoubtedly, when we look at this dismal surrounding and think who can light a beacon of light around us, if there's such a minefield around us, if not, Major General Herzi Halevi, Chief of the IDF Military Intelligence Directorate. He grew up in the parachuted Nahal, the agricultural corps, and as the also in the Chief of Staff Command, commander of companies. He was the commander of the brigade, paratroopers, and others, and of course has been slowly but surely gone through all the ranks until he has reached the head of Intel in the IDF.
Good morning, Professor Reichman, distinguished guests, and Mickey, thank you so much for the introduction. I am very happy for the opportunity to be speaking in this very respectable place. And before presenting the various issues I would like to tackle, let me start with three different insights. I think the conclusion that we have to try to come to after these intelligence surveys, whether the situation today is better than in the past, even more so, and will the future be better than the contemporary or current situation? And I would like to try and answer this question. Of course, you understand I don't have much time allocated to me. I won't be able to touch upon everything. But again, in a nutshell, let me try and answer this question. On the one hand, the situation has improved. We are stronger in relation to various factors and bodies that surround us. On the other hand, we found ourselves in an environment that is so much more complex, we can say more volatile even. And this complexity, I will try and describe and give it some depth and give it some hues and colors in the moments to follow. Again, to try and say it in a nutshell, nonetheless, let me place in again two words together, and I'm creating this hybrid from two Hebrew words, that the situation has become more complex. This is called the Last Supper, as I call it. February of 2010, Ahmadinejad is still the president of Iran, and together with the radical Axis Hassan Nasrallah and Bashar al-Assad, and this entire group of people, they sit together in 2010. None of the people sitting here can imagine what things will be like in 2016. We find ourselves in a period of time which could be termed as dusk, perhaps in the mirror of history. In 100 years from now, when they write a book about the Middle East, I imagine these will be very significant times. You know, during dusk, at least in Judaism, during the dusk hour, we don't actually hold wedding ceremonies. You wait. But we still have to identify trends, and we still have to take decisions. Let me take you a year back in time, on the 14th of July 2015. Again, the nuclear agreement between Iran and the different powers are signed. France also celebrates another day of independence, but again, things are a little different. You can see Raqqa in Syria. Things look different there. I imagine those activists or terrorists that did those terrorist attacks in Paris, they already have those maps back then. They already have plans intact. Paris is celebrating, but somebody is planning things a little differently. A month after that, in Sinai, the place controlled by ISIS, There is an attack in Sheikh Zayed, northern Sinai, 70, 80 vehicles, a lot of fire, a lot of activists attack the Egyptian army. And of course, this is a global village, not only when we talk about internet, but when we talk about terrorism as well. What am I about to talk of? I want to talk about the central messages that come out of those, again, 6 issues that I would like to place focus on. I would like to present the rules of the game in the region, because it's not the same regions and the rules of the games have changed. And I would like to give you an intelligence survey of each one of the camps surrounding us. And of course, I will sum up with a few additional thoughts. So the central messages. The Middle East, one can define it as a stable instability. I think we have to get used to the fact that it is not stable. It has been like this for quite some time. It's probably not going to end soon. Israel's situation has improved, yet it is complex, as I said beforehand, and it is volatile. Israel, the strongest force in the area. Again, the big armies are weakening, are changing. The big threats facing all of these countries are changing. And around us, there are different sort of threats penetrating into our area by different means and ways. It's very important for us to understand how we are perceived by the region. Maybe, again, from the fact that we have resurrected ourselves from diaspora to a state. Maybe we feel this as well, and maybe we are perceived as a very strong force by others, sometimes even as an aggressive force and predictable force. But this is an asset that is very important to preserve also for the future. As to our own, again, internal processes, it has a lot of impact in the Middle East. I like myself to say they have greater impact than in the past. Wars have changed. We have different types of wars today. Wars, again, begin with escalation, the dynamics of escalation. I will talk about this later. But we also have to say that the whole experience of war between the front and the interior, this whole war experience has changed. In the next war that we have here, it will be more difficult. In Iran, changes have taken place in the past year, a change that can be defined as quite very significant. Again, the nuclear plan, again, has been limited. On the other hand, the nuclear vision is still there, and that negative policy of the region, Iran, I mean, towards Israel, they are still intact. They've even received a new kind of legitimization. I will talk of this soon. We talked about the events of the previous week. If I should give it a title in a nutshell, it's how easy terrorism is. Again, this phenomenon of that the individual terrorists, not necessarily organizations, individual who take their inspiration from various bodies, get their knowledge and information from different sources, and go out and do something about it. We are living in a world of online world, in the web. But I would like again to make the distinction again between the financial world, the business world, and terrorism. They're still sitting on that same web, on that same network. You don't have to be the head of a big hotel chain in order to rent a room somewhere. You don't have to be a member of a taxi company in order to be part of Get Taxi. You don't have to be a part of a great organization in order to conduct a terrorist attack. It is enough to get a weapon, and you know what? It's so easy today. People even create their own improvised weapons, and they go out and conduct an attack. As to the Palestinian arena, there are many challenges we are facing vis-a-vis the international community, again, and the attempt to internationalize the conflicts, and the younger generation that sees things differently. And maybe there is some sort of a positive or negative change. I will talk about it soon. And now I would like to describe the rules of the game. Look, this is a satellite picture that was taken at night. I could say that, again, we actually caught the Middle East on a good day. You can see how illuminated Israel is. I do hope that you can identify where, Israel is written there. You can see that Egypt is only illuminated along the Nile and the Delta, and there are many other people living in many other places, and there are so many people living in the Middle East without electricity. So many people that don't have power 24 hours a day. When we look at the GDP, Israel aspires to get $40,000 per capita. Around us, there are certain states. Again, we are 5-fold, 7-fold, 10-fold, but they are even 20-fold. If you look at the rates of unemployment, we can see that we're under the 6%. There are places around us. The Gaza Strip has already gone beyond the 40% line. There's a huge gap that has been created here between us and all those surrounding us, and this gap is ever on the increase. And the minute your neighborhood deteriorates, the value of your home deteriorates, decreases, this should concern us. A poor Middle East, again, is a good bedding for and the nurturing of terrorism. This was, the picture that, again, about 15 or 20 years ago had to deal with this. A few militaries had to deal with this, a few rulers. And in the 80s, Hizbollah and Hamas and other organizations, that is when they were founded. This is the picture they saw before them. This is what we are contending with today. Tomorrow I'll have to show you a different picture on the screen. It is ever changing. There is no organization here that has the capabilities that the Syrian army or the Egyptian army that had on the 6th of October 1973. But again, this is a different volatile situation. A tactical events, again, occurrence by any one of these militaries could have great strategic implications as far as Israel is concerned. I'm talking about a central change in the Middle East. Again, the states are becoming weaker, the organizations are becoming stronger. You have to see the spectrum as it is. There are various empires that are rising. Again, we have, this very strong presence. We have not seen this for the past 40 years. There are some positive aspects. Again, 90% of the Syrian chemical weapons, were thrown away just by force of diplomacy. And yes, there are states, organizations, and individuals. Again, there's even individual terrorism. I mentioned this already, and I would like to elaborate on that further. So the board of the game has changed as well. Not just like in this poem of Hanoch Levin, black soldier is smiting a white soldier and so forth. Again, even the soldiers on the board keep changing identities. And this chessboard contains more than 2 colors. It's so complex. There are so many interests that have to be taken into account. Let me say furthermore, oftentimes we find ourselves in a situation where our bitter enemy is about to be harmed or hurt, and I, by instinct, would like to call him and warn him, because in the setup of the various, vessels and players on the board, we would not like to see our enemy being hurt for our own interest. So Israeli security, since our young state was established up until a number of years ago, was defined mainly by the countries surrounding us, those on our borders, those militaries right across the fence from us. Things are changing. We are moving from this border conflict to a religious war in the Middle East. I think, again, that is the main thing. First of all, between the Sunnis and the Shiites, that's the central conflict. But there's also the conflict of civilizations, from Huntington, from 1996, that radical Islam against Western culture. And when we look today, what are the focal points impacting the security of the state of Israel? They become more remote. Of course, all the various troubles are on our borders, but the center of these are more remote. I'm going to show you 3 different countries. Look at the statistics of Egypt, Iran, and Turkey. Each one of these countries, about 80 million people, all in all of 3 of them are in a very different economic situation. Iran perhaps hopes for a better future in wake of the nuclear agreement. Maybe it's some sort of a junction, again, between the Western world and Russia and Syria. Egypt is looking, again, trying to emerge from a difficult economic situation. Again, the economies of these 3 powers, and what will happen on those remote focal points that I mentioned, these things will impact the security of the state of Israel. Another rule that has changed is those social networks, because this social media allows us a proliferation of ideas in a very rapid manner. Look at this quote. Again, the Arab Spring showed us the potential of the social networks to create a revolution. But even more interesting than what is written on top, it's interesting to see who said it. Well, Ranin is that book who established that Facebook page in Tahrir Square 2011. He actually, puts, starts that wave of that revolution in Egypt. He actually causes Mubarak to be toppled down. He worked in the Silicon Valley. He had a very, again, deep insight. I think this is just the beginning of our understanding. It's so easy to decompose, to topple over through social networks, but it's so hard to rebuild. Things are decomposing before our eyes. It's a very dynamic world. It is the world of the youth, of young people. When I visited one of the intelligence departments I deal with, one of the soldiers said to me, "Let me show you on your Facebook page something." I said to him, "I don't have Facebook." He said, "Wow, you're not virtual." I mean, the real world for these young people, those who are not there, whoever's not virtual is just not there. But I think things will turn around once again in a few years from now. I really love this collage, and I'm showing it to you now. But further than that, there's a very deep story behind this picture. As you can see, these are, again, pictures of victories, bottom part, Second World War, 1948 on the other side. And we also have pictures at the end of the Six-Day War. Again, pictures of victory. What is missing here? I think we are looking for some sort of an updated idea, maybe to add a picture from the past 20 or 30 years. We are finding it difficult to find a picture. And I say to myself, why can't we find such pictures from recent years? Not from only from our war history, but all over the world, I mean. And the reason is placed, and again, there's a common denominator among all these pictures. These are pictures of victories in wars where states were fighting wars. Great armies were fighting great armies, and not a situation in which we are living today, where states, again, that are fighting organizations. In such a situation where states have to fight organization, I think the stronger side is less photogenic. Then, in the past, the victory that was composed of a few components, and I have to say that during the Yom Kippur War, was in first grade. My generation did not experience such experiences. I was under fire many times. I can't say that I experienced, that hellfire, just as they experienced in the Golan Heights in October of 1973 or in the Suez Canal. I hope we never are in such situations again. But we can say about those times that people understood where we want to get to. There was a clear objective in mind. Today, vis-a-vis these organizations, that puzzle of victory is composed of so many pieces. We have to join all those puzzle pieces together and create a very complex picture. That is why victory pictures are just different. So wars during this period of time, how do they begin? I think we still remember the Yom Kippur War. It is etched in our mind, and yet, just logistically analyzing this, how does the war begin if both sides want it? If one side wants it and the other side doesn't want it? Today, we find ourselves in a situation where the highest feasibilities of a war in which both parties are not interested in it, and yet it still breaks out. Let me give you a number of examples. Again, the feasibility of such conflict, I would like to explain a few things. I imagine the feasibility, again, for conflict, again, with the state of Israel being involved, a very low feasibility than in the past. On the other hand, again, because of dynamics of escalation, the feasibility of that is greater, and because of that lack of stability in which we live. And I would like to give you an example. On the 28th of January 2015, again, Hizbollah, launched missiles on the Dove Mountain that is on the Israeli border, and Galan Get and Dor Chaim, they were killed. This event, again, I don't know if the Hezbollah understood the potential of casualties. If, again, the full potential had come to be, I imagine retaliation would have been different, our response would have been different, and maybe today we would have been talking about the third conflict with Hezbollah and not only marking a decade to that second conflict with Hezbollah. Completely different example, Malachi Rosenfeld was again murdered in the Shvut-Rachel Junction in June of 2015. 30 days commemorating his death, there was a Duma murder, the Dawabsha family, again, 2 parents and a baby. On the 1st of October, Naama and Tam and Kenkin were murdered next to Elon Moreh. 3 different events. You have to put on the right pair of glasses to see the connection between them. It is true. They maybe on their own they're insignificant, but they are still of significance. From that 1st of October, we found ourselves in an escalation already 8 months, which is a result of this dynamics that I mentioned before. So in light of all this complexity, what is our evaluation in terms of intelligence? Of course, we try to forecast and to foresee where the future is headed. But again, in light of this complexity, we have to try and create tools for higher quality thinking to identify potentials and not only to have predictions that are limited, that have an expiry date. What Yoshafat Arkavi said in 1959, let me quote him, he said that the evaluation, again, of intelligence, this is what he thought, I always thought it has a supernatural element about it, superhuman, that ability to foresee the future. What is more difficult than foreseeing the future? We have to first penetrate the fog of the present, and once you've done that, when you have learned things in the present and you have completely learned the matter, then you have to try and penetrate the future. That is why the fog in the Middle East is very thick. That is my addition, of course. And let me now move over to try and identify the trends according to the different arenas. We can divide up the Middle East into 4 different camps. It is not a full division, of course. It's not complete in any way. And it places things in order. We have the Shiite radical axis, the Palestinian arena, the Judea and Samaria, as well as the Gaza Strip. And we have the Salafiyya Jihadiyya, that radical Islam that is expressed mainly through ISIS and Jabhat Nusra and other such organizations. And of course, the pragmatic Sunni camp. I would like again to relate to each of these camps. Let's begin with the radical axis, and of course, headed by Iran. Iran, after the nuclear agreements, almost been a year now, the achievements of this agreement are very clear, very simple, and in the meantime, they are short-term. The nuclear program has been limited. The quantity of that enriched material in Iran is smaller. The centrifuges, again, in Iran, again, the quantities are smaller. But I think maybe the conclusion is maybe important, because at the end of this process, Iran has received a double legitimization to manage a limited, albeit limited, nuclear program. But nobody thought that when entering this negotiation that there will be some sort of legitimacy. It received legitimization to walk in the corridors of the UN in New York as one of the nations, as a good nation. Okay, so everything got good and well except for that final conclusion. After the signing of the agreement, again, Khamenei, the leader of Iran, lectures and says that after the end of this nuclear period, in 25 years from now, Israel will no longer exist. It's not even relevant to talk of our relation to Israel at the end of this period. Iran is exerting forces and efforts, not of lectures and burning flags. It's much more significant. Look in those 3 organizations, again, that are building up their forces to fight Israel. Hamas, Hezbollah, and Islamic Jihad. Iran contributes more than 60% of its military branches, budgets, almost 60% of the military branches of those organizations in order to demolish the state of Israel. We can, again, take pride in when the Shiite and Sunni are fighting. We are the only bridge that was able to create, again, some sort of a bridge between Sunni and Shiite. Again, you can see that Shiites give money to Sunnis in order to be able to fight us. Now, in the Shiite culture, and tradition. Again, it's an art to hold the stick on both its ends. We imagine that Iran maybe will try and honor their agreement during the first years, those welfare years, let's call them such. And then I'll talk about the future. I would like you to notice the left bottom of the screen. Iran is advancing technologically. We've really, I think, if there is a war, I think, again, the character of the war will be very different because it will come, again, from nuclear production. It has a very varied military power. It is building up a lot of capability. This should concern us greatly. I would just like to say, just again, before I get to this issue of cyber, 4 months ago in Iran, there were elections at the end of February. During these elections, the Iranian parliament, that emerged was a little more moderate. More moderate doesn't mean that it has any affection for the state of Israel. It just has a different set of priorities, a little more openness to the West. It's less closed, a greater desire to deal with its internal problems. We're very happy for them to deal with their internal problems. I think that our next focus point, a year from today, again, elections to the presidency in Iran. And here the question is whether President Rouhani will be elected for another term, again, with his internal agenda, more moderate, or maybe somebody else. And I imagine, again, the revolutionary arms might give the tone to that. And we can see where Iran is headed. And I think we have to follow up on this. I would like to connect cyber to Iran just because I don't have much time. I could have given you another whole lecture on the whole world of cyber, which is quite fascinating. And again, with the whole definitions of rivals and enemies and friends, it's completely different than the kinetic war. But in this world, I would like you to notice, because our enemies are headed by Iran. Again, Iran takes Hizbollah, advances capabilities. We are a cyber empire. We have a lot of capabilities in terms of civil issues, also in terms of security in this world. It's very important for us to preserve these. It's important for the state of Israel to continue to be, again, a society of technology and science, so that it will have that advantage for years to come that will also give us a security advantage. Now I would like to move over to Hizbollah.
If we talk about the Second Lebanon War, one can say that both of the sides did not object to another and do not object to another decade of quiet and calm. We do not want to attack Lebanon. We have no such intention. But we are ready more than at any time in the past. And of course, improving our capabilities, because that is what any army should do. Its role is to prepare itself for any rainy or different day. But I'd like to actually just say that I think that no army has ever known so much as they know about the Hizbollah. It's unprecedented in our knowledge, but because of the complexity that I spoke about at the beginning, the next war will not be an easy or simple one whatsoever. What does Hizbollah look like in Syria after 5 years of fighting? They've got over 1,500 fatalities. We're talking about 5% of their actual order of magnitude of their fighting combatants. And this, you can also see that in the Shiite street in Lebanon. It's also not working so simply. In Syria as well, the battles are not simple whatsoever, very high intensity, and they're using new weaponry systems, fighting beside big armies. And here and there, they're also touching weaponry that they hadn't come across in the past. And of course, the Hezbollah is experiencing economic times, very difficult ones. They'd like to get all the money from Iran, but the financial sanctions that they're suffering from Saudi Arabia, from the Emirates, the Gulf states, and the Sunni issues, of course, that they're also suffering from the Western world and other sanctions, and from the United States vis-a-vis the banks. If we're talking about, it was spoken about in the media over the last few days, this has brought the Hezbollah perhaps back to conducting itself in a somewhat mafiosi manner. And if you look at what Nasrallah said, if he spoke about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, because he said that in the Western world that is creating his legitimacy in the Arab world as well, the legitimacy against the Israelis, and he's creating a consensus, a general consensus for him against the state of Israel. So when we look at the actual building of the force, Hezbollah is building its force most specifically against the state of Israel and not other challengers. Different kind of warfare, fighting, trying to transfer all the fire into our field, and we're certainly not going to sit back on our laurels and wait for that. Recently, a missile was actually hit at the train garage and works actually in Haifa, and people were killed there. They have continued creating weaponry for Hezbollah, not only for fighting in Syria, but specifically for attacking Israel. The world should not accept it. It violates the 501 resolution after the Second Lebanon War, and it should not. And of course, following the Second World War. And this is something that should not be accepted. And the international arena is not interested in that kind of thing. So they have to pay attention to this kind of thing that is happening. We're talking about their building, their strategic warfare, and the weaponry is coming into Syria for the fighting in Syria. But of course, some of it is transferred into Lebanon. This, again, the world and we should not stand by and ignore this process that is taking place. The next war with the Hezbollah, as I said previously, will not be a simple one, but in my eyes, its end will be cleared. But I'm sure that should Nasrallah know what our capabilities and our knowledge and our know-how and the level of our readiness, he would not take a risk of facing another conflict with the state of Israel. If such a second conflict takes place, Israel will perhaps be hurt, but we will rehabilitate ourselves. We are a strong, resilient society and a progressive one. Lebanon will become a refugee state, and they will be it'll be very tough for them to be rehabilitated, and their population will only suffer and be in dire straits. I'd like to talk about the Syrian space, and I'm not calling it Syria deliberately, but the Syrian space, because Syria doesn't really exist anymore. The events are extremely diverse and variegated. As you can see in the picture, our flag there is in the corner, and that's not arbitrary. The state of Israel over the last few years has decided not to intervene in this conflict, not to become the center of it, nor ostensibly the cause and the casus belli for it. And it's very important that it should remain as such. There were two reasons that were called upon us to actually intervene. That was because of the issues of borders and humanitarian issues. Any person who comes to the border of the Golan Heights and needs medical treatment, he is given the best and the creme de la creme of medical treatment that anyone could ever be given. And it doesn't matter who he is. I'd like to take you on a short trip of the past, present, and future in Syria. It's not a very pleasant one, unfortunately. And unfortunately, I can't even tell you and predict a good end. 44,000 killed up to now. We lost 6,000 in the War of Independence, and a different future was promised. We're talking about millions of displaced and who have left, and refugees who have left. And we're talking about 75% of unemployment, negative growth, over 80% less below the poverty line. And we're talking about, if anyone can talk about what GDP is in Syria, I don't think you can even measure it. The situation is in such dire straits. So if we're talking about the future and what is going to happen in Syria in 15, 20 years, it would be very nice if you think about it in the system of education. You're talking about millions outside the educational system of children. What is working is those who actually experienced the beginning of those events in the year, and was about between the ages of 20 and 30, has been burned with hatred. It'll be very difficult to actually propel this country into a future. They're growing up in an atmosphere of just ignorance and hatred. It'll be very difficult to grow up there and to be educated. Syria is extremely problematic. It's very difficult to see things through rosy-colored glasses. Now, I'd like to talk about the Russian involvement. They came in order to show that they're a superpower, in order to also say something to the United States. And they came also in order to retain the allegiance to the Syrian government and towards Russia. Of course, there's a diversity of interests and stakes of interest here. Now, for the benefit of Syria and saving Bashar al-Assad's regime, a number of countries mobilized. You can see that this sign is hanging in one of the villages in Lebanon. For those who do not read Arabic, have a look at the translation. I'd like to say two things, and what I believe that the president of Russia, Putin, would say about the picture and what it says underneath it. I don't think he would have liked it that he is connected. He doesn't like himself to be seen as a coalition connecting between him and the others. And I don't think who would like this kind of religious affiliation either, but I won't go into that here. The Axis is fighting against Syria. The Iranians, they have over 50,000 fatalities up to now of the Revolutionary Guard, without even calculating the Shiite militias that are actually mobilized by Iran. And that simply is not a simple issue whatsoever. Iran is trying to create some kind of settlement or arrangement in them. But how will these distinguished people take an agreement if they manage to sign it and get up on a plane and they go into the really tough age of actually implement it, applying it into such a rifted country that is saturated with bloodshed? There's chances of that success, of a reunification of Syria into one country with one person at its helm, are very low and very slim chances. What could bring about a change is approximation, more significantly between the United States and Russia. These are the central players, the main players, and they could impose some of their agenda on some of the places, but it would still be very tough to arrange this area into a good way. What has happened over the last few the short period of time into ISIS, against ISIS? And I'd be delighted if you've got another cursor. This isn't working. Now, you can look at the map from a year ago and from now. Days. You can see the dark gray. The ISIS has lost a lot of people. They're recruiting anew. They've lost a lot of their actual oil assets. They try to compensate themselves by actually levying a lot of taxes instead now. And the effort today, the central efforts are actually in the actual fighting, is in order to cut off this contiguity, in order to separate them from Turkey, so there will be somehow some way of curbing the whole flowing of all the weaponry, and these are the main efforts that are being exerted. But you have to remember that ISIS and the Islamic State has a very high level of settling themselves, and they can change and adapt themselves to things that are happening. And I think that over the last 3 months, through the eyes of this organization, were the worst ever for them that they have ever suffered. And the big question is, how would the state of Israel like this whole story to end in Syria? I'd like to end it on a negative aspect. How would we not like it to end? As far as we're concerned, I think to a certain degree, a scene that is described here describes the scene in the cemetery, in the good, bad, and the ugly. ISIS has been defeated, it has been contained, its influence has been decreased, and the superpowers have left the area, and we are stuck here with the radical axis, with the Hizbollah and Iran, with perhaps no better caches of weaponry than we had before. So as far as we're concerned, it's a very complicated, complex end, a negative one, and we need to impact, so this will not happen, with the help of the superpowers and with other ways, of course, as well. I would like to actually talk about the Palestinian arena now. From the end of October, we're experiencing a different experience, a terror wave that is based on incitement and instigation. It has not managed to sweep the entire Palestinian street with it, though. And now, what is the reason for the fact that the Palestinian street has not harnessed itself and joined forces? Now, why is this actually post-modern escalation? It's not the organization or the nationalism that is actually doing it. I think there's something else going on here. We're talking in terms of trends. Now, just a week after a terrible terror attack in Tel Aviv, and I know that if we calculate statistics on terror incidents in Israel is extremely sensitive, but still, we need to analyze where we stand. When we look at the picture from the beginning of October, we can see a very clear trend of a decrease in these attacks. The main issue is not whether there will be any more attacks in the future, but whether we will be able to know how to grapple and contend with the situation in such a way that we will decrease them and also actually decrease the quality, in other words, the severity of them. The way the IDF, especially the Home Front and the Command and Shabak and the Israeli police have been grappling and contending in a very focused manner. They are endeavoring to try and minimize those achievements and to deal with the issues in a very focused manner. And there's a whole harnessing, a mobilization on a national level with punitory steps, which could, by the way, if they take these punitory steps, they may sweep the entire Palestinian street. So they're being very cautious about it. What has not happened? Hamas wanted to join these forces in this wave in Judea and Samaria. The Fatah, the PLO, have defined it as El Aba. They call it the outbreak. Hamas has defined it as the Al-Quds Intifada. They want to see an uprising, riots, and look at the language that is being used here. And it's very important to note that thus it should be retained and preserved. Abu Mazen in September declared his intention and then rescinded his intention. But on the other hand, he hasn't actually become any younger. His objection to this armed conflict, but he's running in the international arena a whole struggle against the state of Israel, and he wants to internationalize the entire conflict. They both understand how important the security coordination is for the retaining of a quality of life, and they can see the upheaval in the Middle East, and they know that things could really be in dire straits. But he's also looking over there, the fence to us, and he sees that there are things that are better here in Israel. But there's also a rift between the old school guard that wants this international sort of character, but the young generation is very different. Why are they not organizing themselves into an organization, an association? Why are they going as singular stabbers on their own lone wolf sort of methods? The public has been strengthened, the leaders are weaker. This is an era of a public that looks for directions of change with the stress and underscoring of the young generation. I would now like to add a few words about the Gaza Strip with the various sort of three angles of a triangle. Hadas is actually deterred because of what happened in Protective Edge. They're not interested in another campaign or another conflict with the state of Israel. I can imagine that what we see now may be totally different in a month's time. Things change so swiftly. And the same Hizbollah, they've started, and Hamas, they want to continue building all the tunnels, etc. But the situation, 42% of unemployment and issues of power and everything in the Gaza Strip, we're talking about 2.3 million people in a humanitarian state of crisis. Now, how can we actually balance that equation into this triangle? We leave Hamas deterred, and we try and cut back on the building of their force, but we also try and improve the economic condition of the people in the Gaza Strip so that they will have something to lose. It won't be against all odds, and perhaps we will stop this kind of ongoing continuity of events. There are no simple answers to any of this situation. We, of course, are dealing with it and delving very deeply into it and truly trying to find some kind of solution. Now, a little bit about the jihad camp. This is a consensus in the world that the terrible IXIL, which is Amalek 2016, it's a dynamic period of time. The terror's aim is to terrorize, and to continue to do so, it has to innovate, it has to surprise us. And the surprises, if you look at this very high level of consciousness that they have to arouse, the Islamic State ideology and their sort of awareness level is something very high and very important. This was taken out of an ISIS magazine. It's written in very fluent English, and it is designated for an English-speaking public, not for most of the populations in the Middle East. And they carried out, by the way, the terror attack in Paris. Just terror, Lee. It just reminds me of Just Do It, the Nike advertisement. It works on exactly the same impact areas. That's the way they're trying to recruit terror participants. And this is the actual rusty little symbol here that they show how that they actually managed to down that plane, the Russian plane in Sinai. The moment it has been published, the achievement, the accomplishment actually is in the lights, then we know that its impact is going to infiltrate and permeate. We know that the state of Israel will have to grapple with this. We're bringing a different strength, an intel strength, one of fighting with fire, with live fire, one that is extremely unique. But on the other hand, you have to add something to that. If such events should take place, and of course some could be defined that have already taken place, the more the negative reverberation this would have, the greater the appetite that they will feel has been whet in their mouths for attacking again and again. If you look at what happened at after that terror attack last week, then the public in Israel is strong and resilient as continued business as usual, and the social solidarity as well, and that is good. Now, what about the Sunni pragmatic countries, most specifically Saudi Arabia? It is no longer Saudi Arabia as we saw 18 months ago, a different supportive environment surrounding a different king, much more proactive. He wants to lead the Sunni camp in the Middle East that has been perhaps stabilized this country against Iran in the Middle East more so than any other, and is running structural reforms that are extremely deeply established, and the intention of that is to bring Saudi Arabia to be independent of its oil and much more successful by 2020. Now, these pragmatic countries are actually approximating to our interests, and their policy now towards Hizbollah is changing, and it's an opportunity for us. So this is the regional overview, and now I would like to summarize in brief just a few points. How will the next conflict look? The next, I think, campaign in the north will be very different. I don't want to say it's more or less, but it'll be definitely different from the Second Lebanon War and also from Protective Edge, but also very different from the Yom Kippur War and even before that. The Yom Kippur War in our homeland, we just had one fatality from a frog missile that was killed, that was targeted from Syria. Unfortunately, things are going to be very different, but we will be able to stand up and fight against any challenge and grapple with it. But the path to that achievement will not be a simple one whatsoever, nor an easy one for any of us. And as it always happens in wars, there's a price to be paid. So I think that if our enemy knew what our know-how, our preparedness, our capabilities were, they would have saved themselves that conflict. And in all this complex world, what is the role of intel? The role of intel in this specific era is double. We're trying to prevent superfluous wars, and if there should be any, to come up with an upper hand in this modern war, modern era with the wars. Things are so much more significant. The technology, for example, and others, and intel. There's the classic work of the intel that is still the most important, that defines and spearheads and describes the enemy, its surrounding, and to tell the story. The second way it works, is a little newer and more novel, is to impact the actual reality, not just to talk and describe, but to impact. And between these wars, the IDF has been actually running things in such a way that we want to retain our deterrents, prevent them from building their force, preparing us to be able to grapple with it. The kind of effort that we're exerting so many capabilities into, and I think to quite a degree of success. And to do all these complex issues, this plethora of issues, we need excellent people. And I do believe that in intel, in the intel force of the IDF, you've got the best possible people, the creme de la creme that Israel could provide. And so I think that we have a tremendous advantage to be able to grapple with the actual pace of change, and we are some of the youngest people there. We invest so much in high school students before they join the army and those who serve with us, and we believe that we contribute immensely to better citizens and civilians who then go out into their civilian life and contribute significantly. Those who have left the intelligence force and joined the other fields in Israel have contributed aid. We know that the Middle East is less stable. It has become a very fruitful and fertile ground for so many negative impacts and influences. In this dynamics of escalation that we do not wish, we need a very strong intelligence infrastructure. And if we look at the map of the various regional interests, especially in two areas, we have to work with the superpowers, and we have to take advantage of the approximation between us and the pragmatic Sunni countries. As you can see in this picture, alongside the strong side, there is more capability of actually positioning and stabilizing reality, and we want to ensure, to supervise where that path is being paved. Reality is very complex, but we can impact and influence. Thank you very much.